My name is Randi Rubenstein, and welcome to the Mastermind Parenting podcast. At Mastermind Parenting, we're on a mission to support strong-willed kids and the families that love them. Hi, everyone. I have an exciting episode this week. I am here with Eli Harwood. Eli is a licensed therapist who lives in Colorado with her husband, Trevor, and their 3 children. She's been nerding out on attachment research for the past 2 decades. Okay, I've been nerding out for the past 2 months, so you've got a lot to catch me up on for the past 2 decades, and she's on a mission to help make the world a better place one relationship at a time. She continues this mission in her clinical work, her writing, and running her mouth about attachment on social media. When she isn't working to make the world a more secure place, she's playing dress up with her kids, obsessing about her sourdough starter, and reminiscing about that one time she won a set of globes at a Price is Right contestant. Visit her at attachmentnerd.com. So welcome. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
We've been exchanging emails, and I've been fangirling over you because I feel like the universe sent you to me. Because I just read your book, and what I realized is I do everything out of order in my life. I'm just not a linear person. And I'm like, okay, so what you have and what you're teaching, all this attachment research and putting it into real people language so we can understand it, and understanding what the hell attachment even is. It's the most pivotal. I don't want to say it's the most pivotal piece, because we're going to get into what I really think is the most pivotal piece, but figuring out our own attachment. Are we, were we securely attached to our main caregiver, to our mother? Were we not? That's such an important thing for us to know as parents. Wouldn't
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the way I think of it is, there's a lot of things we inherit from our parents, our genetics, our culture, our language, but the piece that we inherit that we can adjust for the benefit of our children the most is the patterns of relating. And that's what attachment is. So it's how did our caregivers relate to us, and how did that affect us in our nervous system? And then how can we get ourselves into a secure place about who we are, about our emotions, our needs, our responsiveness to other people, so that we can cultivate secure patterns that our kids can then inherit, and then take those on to the next generation and the next generation. And if we don't take the time to figure out what it was like in our own childhood relationships, we usually just repeat some stuff that we don't want to repeat, right? You really can't go forward without looking back.
Usually, I think always.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Because you're operating from your conditioning, your subconscious conditioning, your body conditioning. They say 95% of the time, until you start to do this work and understand it. I call it finding your puzzle pieces, right? And most of these puzzle pieces are invisible. And so this attachment work and understanding, starting with, I don't know, did I have secure attachment as a kid? Right? I think the most pivotal piece is really learning about your own attachment. And I don't know if that happens without working with a therapist to help you uncover it. It's taken, I could say 26 years in, I'm reading this attachment stuff, and I'm like, oh, I for sure had insecure attachment. And I from the little bits and pieces that I've learned, I'm pretty sure I was some form of avoidant. But if I had gotten this information when my kids were little, and I had known that I could have found a really good therapist to help me understand this and understand this about myself, see it, it's bring it out of my blind spot. It wouldn't have taken me over 2 decades to finally organically come to this learning. I
mean, this is exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I was doing the work as a therapist, and I was watching the potency of this information hit parents' hearts in a way that allowed them to make massive transformations in what they're doing with their kids, which was so effective in helping kids to regulate and thrive and feel secure and therefore learn behavior that they need to learn or get through a hard season. So I was like, okay, I have to take this out and I have to start spreading the message in a way that people can access earlier in their parenting journey and more effectively. Like, this got to be out there, because truly, once you kind of click on this and you recognize, oh, this is an attachment thing. This is my story, my inheritance. This is what happens for me when emotions enter the room. And this is what I want to learn how to do. You have an actual transformation process. You can understand what it is you're transforming and the steps to get there. And that's so powerful as parents, because I know very few parents who aren't entirely dedicated to giving their kids the best they possibly can. Most parents are doing that. But according to the statistics, 50% of us are insecure and passing insecure patterns down to our kids. And so we really want to give as many parents as possible the information they need. And that's why I wrote this book. I actually have a first book that's a guided journal too, because not everybody can find a therapist or afford therapy. So that was really important to me. So there's a guided journal that is more like, here's the questions you need to ask yourself about your childhood, about later on other relationships that affected your patterns, and how you can learn secure patterns in your adult relationships, which is huge as a parent, because if we don't have secure places where we can vent and we can cry and we can get buffered, it's a lot harder to buffer our children,
100%. And I love that you have the journal, because that's probably what I would have done. I mean, as an avoidant attachment person,
you're not looking for the therapist.
No, I was a lone wolf. I was like, I got it. I'm not a problem. I handle my own stuff and I'm not going to bother anyone else with it. And, and so I've been a isolated self-helper. Right. I was addicted. I mean, early on when I had this baby that wouldn't stop crying, it's just, I knew there was something to figure out. I had this, now I know my why that was driving me was, damn it, my kids are going to have a happy childhood. I was so driven. I didn't realize that I was so driven. It was all unconscious. But when I had a baby that cried all the time or a lot of the time and just didn't seem happy, I started learning all about child development. I started reading all these books, and my husband was like, what the fuck? Like, what are you reading? Like, like what? And I was like, are you talking to me? I was just in the middle of something. Like, he's like, it's like you're cramming for a semester final tomorrow and you never went to class. Like, what are you reading? I was like, stop talking to me. I just need a minute.
You were panicking. And you were panicking in part because you didn't have a regulating experience. So what I think people get confused a lot is the idea that if our kids are secure with us, that means that they don't feel upset as often or they don't have big feelings. But it's actually that they have a deep sense that there is a grown-up in their life who can handle their emotional states, not overreact and not underreact. We don't want to say, you're fine, stop that, everything's fine, look at the bright side. But we also don't want to go, oh my God, something's wrong. Oh my God, this is terrible. You're having a traumatic experience. We want to be able to say, like, oh, honey, you're uncomfortable, or you're a highly sensitive baby. I had a couple of those. So, that this is your temperament. This is what you're working through. I'm here. And that urgency that you had of like, we've got to make these feelings go away. That was what little Randi learned to do. Yeah. Nobody here can handle my feelings. My feelings are a burden. I need to make them go away. And so then you come into motherhood, and mother Randi thinks, I've got to make this kid's feelings go away. Yeah. That's what I'm supposed to do. Yep. Oh, what an insight you had. I just want to like applaud you for having done that work to be curious about what was driving that anxiety for you.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a long road, and I feel like it's all kind of coming together and in perfect timing. I mean, I'm 2 days away from taking my youngest child to college.
Amazing.
Right? I mean, it's so crazy that I'm having you on, which this is really the foundational work that if I had found, I mean, you're too young for me to have found you 26 years ago.
Yes.
But if I had found this, if I had
Yes.
found someone like you, if I had found your book, that would have opened my eyes and sort of led me on this path sooner. I mean, this has been a long, when people are like, how did you get into this work? I'm like, where do I start? I mean, I don't even know.
I mean, I joke sometimes about myself that, when people say, how long have you been practicing? I'm like, well, upwards of 40 years, because it's been from my childhood experiences that I was drawn to the work, because I also had insecure attachments dynamics with both of my parents. And so when we come into this, awareness, there's usually a season or a stage of our life where we didn't have the information, and it would have been helpful to have it.
Yeah.
Right?
It would have been helpful, and it would have been helpful to have the support and the resources, because I think when you get this information, there's a lot of grieving, right? Like grieving what you didn't have. And it's confusing because you're grieving what you didn't have, but also now, like, you're taking care of little people.
Yes.
And so they're dependent on you to be alive. And so you're like, okay, I got to figure my shit out or pretend that I have it together, because like they need to go to the park or they need to be wiped.
Yeah. So it's containing, right? So I call this healing while dealing, which, this is one area I had some tremendous privileges, that I discovered this research before I had kids. And so I didn't have to kind of undo my relational patterns at the same time that I was being swamped in motherhood. But I think that that's the most common experience around this, is learning these things, or knowing that we need to learn these things once our kids are in our lives, because that's usually the trigger that's like, well, something's funny here. I don't feel so great about what's happening, and I don't know what it is. So that's healing while dealing. And when you're healing while dealing, you really are doing a tremendous mental gymnastics maneuver, because yes, you do need to feel sad that you didn't have caregivers who were soft enough and sturdy enough for you to feel secure. And your children do need you to, in this moment, be soft enough and sturdy enough for them to feel secure. And not 24/7. Let's actually start with one of my favorite statistics, and this is in the book. But there's some research that shows when children are securely attached to their caregivers, that experience of synchronicity of, like, you're in an emotional state and I'm there for you and I'm helping regulate you, is only happening 30% of the time. I like to say parenting is graded on a curve, because nobody's getting 100%. So an A cannot be 100%. An A is 30%. And so we're not expecting ourselves to be perfect or do this right all the time. It's about a pattern. So is my primary pattern with my children that I am soft enough that they can have feelings and they can feel nurtured by me and understood, but I am sturdy enough that I can have boundaries and there's structure and they sense that I am guiding them in an actual direction, right? If I can do those two things 30% of the time, my kids will go, I can rely on my caregiver. How cool is that?
I think I read that same statistic years ago, and I've shared it with many parents, and I will tell you, it makes people feel so much better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's pretend it's 50% or 70%. Let's even pretend that statistic, because it is, it's a scientific piece of information. We could get another piece of information later. Let's pretend. I still think it's best to believe that one, because it helps us with our anxiety. And coming into parenting with a perfection mindset and an anxiety mindset just seals the deal that our kids won't feel secure with us. Like, you cannot offer a kid security by obsessing about whether or not your kid is secure with you.
Yeah.
You have to kind of go into that place of self-compassion and self-trust and go, I'm doing the best I can. I'm going to keep learning. And 2 years from now, I'm going to do better than I am doing right now, because that's the growth process as a parent. But that doesn't mean my kid's not getting a good enough parent all along the way.
Yeah. I were like finishing each other's sentences because I was literally about to say so many people come with that perfectionism mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And and then you just went into, I was like, exactly that. Okay. So I want to just play like the very beginning intro of your book.
I love that.
And yeah, and for everyone, her book does come in print. It's called Raising Securely Attached Kids Using Connection Focused Parenting to Create Confidence, Empathy, and Resilience. And I, in this nowadays, because it's amazing, I listen to most books like this on Audible. I used to have to read
It's great.
everything. I know. And then fall
Yes.
asleep 2 pages in. And now on and off during my day. I mean, I listened to your book in like 4 days. It was perfect. I
Oh, I
loved it.
love that.
Okay. So I'm going to play just like 2 minutes and then we'll talk about it.
There are so many good books and guides available to help us all learn how to parent in conscious, smart, and effective ways. While those resources are wonderful and can be a huge help in navigating particularly challenging situations or stages, clients often come to me reporting that the techniques or approaches in these books, quote unquote, don't work, and that they've had to fall back on parenting techniques that they don't want to use, like yelling, shaming, and punishing. When I check out the books they have been consulting, they usually offer sound parenting advice. But the advice written in them is advice that works brilliantly if, and only if, we have already cultivated a secure attachment pattern with our children. Attachment research is clear. The quality of the relationship between a caregiver and a child is the first ingredient necessary for helping our children to learn, grow, and thrive. While it's great to learn an acronym to help us stick to a consistent routine, it won't do diddly squat in the long run if our children don't emotionally trust us. Creating a secure relationship with our children is the foundational step in helping them live deeply fulfilling, meaningful, and connected lives. When our children feel seen, heard, supported, and emotionally soothed by us, the practical parenting tips and tricks work way more often. A connected relationship is truly the most outstanding ingredient needed to raise a well-regulated, socially capable, all-around secure kid who grows into a caring, confident, and resilient adult.
That, like, I teach a concept. I mean, I'm not the one who came up with it. I think a lot of people do. You got to connect before you correct. And we have a program. And so we take people through this 12-week program, and we don't get to consequences until the last 3 weeks of the program. And so they're spending 9 weeks where we're focusing on the connection piece, right? And really taking them through, like, how do we help our kids to feel securely attached? And so we have this framework for how we do it, right? And so I think even just the term connection, even though everyone, it's kind of like the term empathy, like over, it's like people are like, okay, I know what it is, but like, could you give me an example? Like, or what exactly do you mean by that? Even I think the term connection can trip people up a little bit. Like, what does it look like? What exactly am I going for? Can you give me an example? So I'm interested in, like, what would you say to that? Would you tie it into this secure attachment concept, and how would you explain that?
Yes. Well, connection is absolutely one of the primary ingredients that we need to have in our relationship with our children for them to feel secure with us. And I like to think of it as the ability to be in sync with our kids. And we all know what this feels like in relationships. Kind of more like colloquial terms would be like, we're vibing, right? There's sort of a vibe between us. When we look at it in the data, we also call this attunement. And it's our ability to catch our child's internal state and enter into some form of soothing or satisfying rhythm when they are in that state. So as an example, Let's say our child comes home from school and they are so excited because tomorrow is Spirit Day. And they're like, Mom, can we get some hairspray? Can we do this? Right? A connected response or an attuned response would be that we would allow that excitement to enter into our body enough that we can join them, where we're like, wait, what? You're so excited about Spirit Day. This is so exciting. It doesn't mean that we say like, yes, we can go right now to Walgreens and buy 7 cans of colored hairspray. It's that we're joining their body state and we're understanding the enthusiasm in their body. And that experience of someone joining us, and it doesn't mean that we're becoming their feeling state, but we're catching it. I like to think of it as like taking a sip. You know, we don't want to like chug our child's feeling state and let it take over us and lose where we were, but we want to take a sip of it so they can sense that we have an awareness of what's going on inside of them and we're with them in that. On the flip side, let's say our kid comes home from school and they're just really low, you know, and we're like, how was your day? And they're like, crappy. You know, we're going to join that state by remembering what it's like in our bodies when we have a crappy day and what we would hope people would offer us in that state, which is, you know, we're coming down a little bit, where we're going to amp up when our child's excited to join their excitement. We're going to kind of amp down into that space. We're going to lower our voice, right? Our body's going to kind of get into a little slumpier zone. We're going to say, I'm so sorry you had a crappy day. And our child will be able to feel that we've entered that rhythm with their nervous system. But we have also maintained a groundedness, right? So if our child's going, today was crappy, and we're going, what happened? Who did it? What's their phone number? I'm calling the principal. That's not attuned or connected. That's a rescue stance, and that's very anxious. Now we've just added anxiety into our child's lower state of feeling. When we can be with, that's a great word to hold on to, is withness. Like be with your child in their emotional states. That's connection. When they can sense that their presence in the room affects our nervous system, but doesn't over affect our nervous system. We don't want our children to feel like they're so powerful that whatever they feel knocks us over, or we completely change our boundaries as a result of what they feel. But we want them to sense that I feel you, kid, and I'm here. I got you. I'm with you. You're not alone in this feeling state, whether it's a joyful feeling state or a painful feeling state. I am connected to you. How's that? That was a long-winded answer.
No, I absolutely love that. And I want to even take it a little bit further. So when we're doing this attachment research on ourselves, right? Trying to figure out, was I a securely attached kid or not? Would you say that an indication, probably not, is if you go into that rescuer, hero, fixer mode and you're calling the principal and you're so panicked, you're so overcome. Like, of course, when our kid has a shitty day, it doesn't feel good. We're not happy about that, right? So being with, I love that, being with, right? Like it is going to affect you. But when you find yourself now, like just obsessed with fixing, solving, rescuing, that's probably, would you say that would be an indication that you have some work to do in terms of your own attachment wounds?
Absolutely. Because what it tells us is that you have a survival response to emotion and discomfort. And why do you have that survival response? Well, it's because you had to handle what you felt on your own. And, you know, there's a lot we can really geek out, and I geek out in the book enough about it, but we would guess that if you take that hypervigilant kind of response to your child's emotions, that you grew up with a caregiver who was sometimes able to be there for you, but not at a level that it was a pattern. So you had a taste of that experience, but you had way more of a taste of feeling abandoned emotionally. And so when you're in this parenting role now, you take on a more enmeshed approach to your child because you're like, I don't want you to ever feel alone in what you feel. And so you think that by being rescuing and by being hyper responsive that your child won't feel what you felt. But actually, ironically, they feel something similar because they can feel you amp up into your trauma when they are in their feelings. And that actually is creating the type of abandonment feeling that you felt. It breaks my heart because the intention is so good. It's like, I don't want my kid to have to go through what I went through. Like, oh my gosh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. But we can't offer our kids a secure parent if we haven't first learned to be secure in our own nervous system and in our own body and our own emotions. We have to do that work first.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's helpful. I mean, I want everyone to listen to this and to learn about it, not from a place of, oh, great, I've been doing it wrong.
Yes.
You know, I always say I'm a fixer in recovery that quite often relapses. I mean, that's my go-to is fixer, rescuer. And so, you know, when you hear these things about yourself, like to have the self-compassion to say, well, but of course, that obviously was my conditioning.
Yes.
And I want to hear more about when you show up as a fixer or a rescuer, it means that there were times that someone showed up for you, and there were also probably more times that they didn't, but it doesn't mean that no one so I must have had the feeling that, or I must have felt like there was someone that was there to.
Here's a question. That's the question for you is, with either of your caregivers, if you had two, or with any of your extended caregiving families. So that also could be like grandparents, uncles, aunts, teachers. Did you ever, as a child, have the experience of someone being emotionally soft and caring with you when you were tender? Did you ever have an experience like that?
See, that's why I was like, maybe that changes my narrative. You know, there's so much that we can't remember, especially when we went through a lot of trauma. You know, there was, you know, there can be, for me, there was a lot of repression. And a lot of memories have come back to me. Really, I would say in the last 15 years. It only started about 15 years ago. I started to have really lucid dreams. And so a lot of my memories have it. I think it just felt too unsafe to come back during my waking hours. And so they started coming back in my dreams, all kinds of things. And, you know, now I have, you know, done a lot of dream decoding, and I've even learned as a coach how to do a lot of dream decoding. So I do that for myself a lot, because I know there's just like, you know,
it's
like
our unconscious processing. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I don't have anyone to answer. I mean, I don't have anyone to answer these questions. Like I feel like my memories are, I did not have that person. I didn't have a person. I don't remember anyone ever making me feel like I could tell them about any issue I was having. So that really has, I mean, and I can talk about this now without even getting teary, because this is just my story. And more than anything at this point, you know, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, I would be bawling, crying right now. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it was still too tender and like brand new news for me. But now at this point, I'm like, you know, there's so much I don't remember, but based on my patterns, you know, I mostly have a curiosity. Based on my patterns, I would say that I got the message at
There was nobody.
Very, very young age that there was nobody. And I even have compassion for why there is nobody. Like, not that I learned this firsthand, but I've just put puzzle pieces together. My mom was 21 when she had me. She already had my brother. My dad was going back and forth he was supposed to go to Vietnam, and at the last minute he got sent to Korea. And so they were young. They were 23 and 21. Yeah. They had 2 kids. And when she was pregnant with me, I mean, I think I have that wound that can happen, you know, the break in the bond wound within. I learned this from a friend of mine who I did some sessions with on she's trained in family constellation work. And when my mom was pregnant with me, when she was about 8 months pregnant, her father died on the operating table at 59.
Oh.
So she's 21. She's got a 2-year-old. She's about to have another baby. Her husband's in Korea. Her mom, who she's been relying on as her safety net, is now in grief because her husband, my grandmother's husband, abruptly dies.
Yes.
My mom was in deep grief when I was born. And so like there is, my inner child wound that I know about is that I think I always felt like I was a little bit of a pain in the ass, and I was annoying. Like
you were a burden.
I was a burden. I was a burden, but I also understand, like, now at this point, I was pissed.
Yeah,
I've
from
been
a
pissed
human
about
perspective. Of
yes.
course.
Yes. Like, I was pissed about it for years. So don't think that I was always like, oh, poor my mom. I was like, what the fuck? Like, why was nobody, why was I a burden? And so I was pissed about it. But now I understand, because now I'm at that place in my own healing that, okay, now it feels safe to look at her story. How could she have been anything other than that? Like I get it. Right. But that early attachment wound, my story really has been, I don't think I had anyone. I mean, I don't remember having anyone. So
you had a lot of healing. It's interesting. I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about this. It sounds like you had a avoidant experience and maybe some disorganized experiences, like some abuse and trauma. And so your healing process, I think, has meant going from denial and, repressed memory to being very overwhelmed and flooded with memories and feeling states and awareness and all of that. So my guess is that rescuer stance for you is a little bit more about being a trauma survivor than what I mentioned earlier. So what I mentioned earlier, we would call like a resistant pattern. I think it's probably more like you're coming out of some really, really awful experiences. And so your brain is just in a safety mode and in like a danger mode when your kids get vulnerable in some way. And so it's like, I've got to fix this. I got to save that, because you really needed someone to save you, like literally.
Yeah.
You needed that.
Yeah.
You know what I love? One of the things I loved about writing this book was nuancing attachment. Is sometimes when you're online and people are talking about attachment, it feels like, I don't know, like, take this quiz. What Harry Potter character are you? Like, what attachment pattern are you? And the reality of attachment is it's incredibly complex. Think about the number of interactions we have with our children, and think about the number of people that are a part of our life as a child and a part of our children's lives. So as you read this, the goal is not to go, which type am I and what does that mean? The goal is to go, what happened in my life exactly the way you just did, Randi? Like, what happened in my life and my story in my attachment relationships? And how did that either lend me to feeling secure or insecure? And what do I need to do in order to heal those things and learn more secure patterns for my kids? Does that make sense?
Perfect sense. Yeah. Perfect sense. Yeah.
And that's what you've done. You say you're new to attachment, but it's almost like you knew this in your bones. You've known this in your healing process. And now you're reading this book and getting the language and the research and the labels to explain things you've already known, I think.
Yeah. But I think getting the labels and the research that I do think I knew in my bones, in some way, at varying degrees, just based on wherever I was as a human being, growing, learning, healing, evolving. I think having words, and it's like, there's something about, I found this, I found this also when I read, what's her name? The book called Lindsay. God, I can't remember what her name is. I talked about her on the podcast. She wrote a book called like Adult Children of Emotionally Immature, or whatever.
Yes, I don't know her name, but I know the book.
Yeah, it's not a catchy name, but it's a great book. And when I was told to read that book, I was like, one of my really good friends who's a therapist. She's like, read this one. And I was like, how much longer can I be reading about this shit? Like, I know, like, what is it going to tell? Like, I know my story. Like, this is really,
Yes.
and she's like, just read it. And I will tell you, there was something about hearing someone's story
Mm-hmm.
that in whatever way felt like my own. And then to hear this clinician put it into
Yes.
language that I found incredibly healing, because it sort of feels like, and it's the same with your book, it feels like the opposite of gaslighting, right? Like, I'm not crazy. These things happened. And now I have this person who's just succinctly described what I already felt in my bones. And now I can understand it on a deeper level.
I love it.
So good. I mean, it's so
It's so
good.
good.
So
when we are growing up, the relationship between us and our children, we are actually helping them to form their ideas about their reality, right? So if our child is saying, you know, you're being mean, mom, and we're like, no, I'm not, you're being disobedient. We're forming this narrative for them. And depending on who our child is, they might take that narrative on, or they might just throw it back in our face. Depends on their personality. So when you're in an insecure attachment legacy, the narrative is always being covered up with the coping patterns. So if you're growing up with a caregiver who has a ton of anxiety, you know, their reality is shaping your story about your reality. If you grow up with a caregiver who's very dismissive of emotions and feelings, you know, that narrative of everything being fine is going to, you know, cover up some of the feeling states in your body that aren't fine. And when you get into adulthood, there is sort of this like reveal process. And I think when we were reading a book about attachment, and specifically this book I wrote, like this makes more sense. This is the story my body was telling me. And it's different than the story my family was telling me. And my family told me a different story because they didn't know how to tell a secure story. And a secure story is not 100% positive all the time. A secure story is we can acknowledge what is true in a moment in a way that regulates the room. So if my kids are saying, Mom, you're being so mean, you know, sometimes I am. Sometimes I'm just cranky and I just don't have the patience, and I'm just whatever. I will sometimes nuance what they've said because, you know, a 4-year-old only has one word to say ouch, which is mean. But I might say something like, oh, okay, you're right. I'm really not being very patient, or I'm being kind of harsh, or Mommy needs a timeout for a minute because I'm just not using my kind words the way I want to. But that becomes their narrative, so that as they grow up, you know, when we all talk about it again, they can be like, oh my gosh, you all remember how intense Mom was about spilling things on the living room rug? Right. And I'm like, yeah, I know, that was a thing for me. I just could not handle rug spills. And like, you know, but there's not like a dissonance between their narrative and my narrative, because I'm okay with the fact that I'm not a perfect parent. I don't need them to see me that way. I'm okay with the fact that their childhood isn't perfect. I don't need them to see it that way. And so we can share this narrative over time. And as they grow up, they won't be going, wait, what? My childhood wasn't perfect? Or wait, what? My parent was terrible and I actually wasn't that bad of a kid? You know, they'll just be like, yeah, there were some days. Mom was great. She really loved us. And man, was she weird about X, Y, or Z? You know, and I'll be like, yeah, that's right. You're not wrong.
You're not wrong. It's so true. It's so interesting. Like I remember when my kids were little, like sometimes when they would say like, you're like, stop yelling at me. And, and probably early on, I'd say like, I wasn't yelling at you. Right. So I would sort of gaslight them. And, because I really did work hard not to be a yeller, because I grew up with a lot of rage in my household. And
Yes.
so that, you know, when it was like, you know, little, much younger me, right? I knew what yelling sounded like. I knew what screaming sounded like. And so to me, my perspective was, are you
That's not what's
fucking
happening
kidding
here.
me? Right? Like, you don't know
Yes.
yelling. And
Yes.
so, and like, I'm keeping my shit together over here. And
Mm-hmm.
so at first I would argue and gaslight them.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I became like, adolescent parent me,
Mm-hmm.
I stopped arguing with it. And I would stop myself and I would say, did that feel like yelling? And they would say,
Ugh.
yeah. They would say, yeah. And I'm like, it was intense. Did it scare you? And, and sometimes they would say, yeah. And I would say, okay, I'm really sorry for scaring you. I need to just chill for a minute. Like, I was really upset. I'm upset. I'm annoyed. I'm whatever. And I need to just take a minute,
Well, and isn't it interesting what a beautiful thing you did, which is your kid's understanding of yelling is very different than your understanding of a parent yelling. And how beautiful that they felt you were yelling at them in a situation that you wouldn't have seen that way because you had protected them from that generational experience of yelling and screaming at heightened, overwhelmed states. And what they were trying to tell you is, I'm disconnected from you. You feel harsh or like, intense. I love the word intense in a way that's dysregulating to me. Right. And then you learned how to recognize within your own body that, and not in a shaming way, okay, I need something right now. I love it so much. I hope you know this. It's quite remarkable what you've come from and what you've done, my dear.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just going to receive that. And, yeah, I've devoted my entire adult life, I think, to doing this work. And, and I think it's why I'm so passionate about it, because I kind of feel like I'm like, I can feel this much better in my body and happier, not happy all the time. I mean, that's for sure. But really, it's not even happier. Healthier.
Secure. I think the word secure is
it
I love the
is.
word so much. It's like feeling secure. Like, I can feel sad. I can feel joy. I can feel anger. I can feel frustration. But within all of those feelings, I am secure. I am worthy.
Yes.
I belong. It will be okay. I can figure it out. We can figure it out. I mean, that's what we want for all of our kids to have. And you have done what's called earned secure attachment patterns. So you have analyzed and acknowledged and processed and grieved the insecure patterns you inherited growing up. And you've earned and learned how to have a secure mindset about your kids and their needs and your patterns with them, and then how to execute that mindset into patterns between you and them. I mean, it's the hope, it's the dream. It's why I wrote this book. And yet you didn't even really need the book. You just needed the book to validate that you did it right. But you really did this in a beautiful way. And I'm so glad.
I think the learning about attachment and becoming an attachment nerd myself, now I'm going to be one of your disciples. I think it's also opening like the next level of healing for me, because for me, as I think as an avoidant attachment person, there was so much locked away, even in my body. And so something also interesting has happened. I didn't realize I had any anxiety until my son, who's 8, was probably 2.5, 3 years ago. Like, absolutely didn't know. I mean, knew that I woke up in the middle of the night, went through periods of time where I had some issues sleeping, like I'd fall asleep and then I had trouble. But I never associated it with anxiety until my youngest son started driving. And I was, when he was getting his license, I had this weird feeling in my stomach. And I thought, I didn't know if I was getting sick.
What is
like, I couldn't figure it out, and it wouldn't go away and it wouldn't go away. And then I realized, I think it's anxiety. And I actually have a theory, for years and years, not now, for almost probably, I don't know, 8, 9 years. But up until the last 8 or 9 years, I had this battle with closet smoking. And like, it was the monkey on my back. The monkey on my back from the time I was a young teenager until 8 or 9 years ago. And I mean, I would go, pregnancies without smoking, but man, it was abstinence. It wasn't like I was never truly a non-smoker. It was my favorite thing. It was the thing I looked forward to. It was like, I always knew, I was like, I don't just have an addiction. I have like a love affair with this. I mean, it was like, and shameful. Like, who the fuck wants to admit that, right? But what I think it really was I think it was a coping mechanism for anxiety, because it's inhales and exhales, right? And so once the smoking had been truly out of my life for long enough, now it's like, I mean, because when I was stressed all the years past about whatever, I'm going to go and buy a sneaky pack of cigarettes and figure out when I can, So now without it, I feel that anxiety. I realize, oh my God, I think this is anxiety.
Yes.
But it was so masked.
Well, when you don't have safe people in your development to help you label your feelings, notice your feelings, and actually regulate your feelings, which doesn't mean shutting them down. It means letting them out enough that they pass. So if you don't have that, you don't actually have a lot of familiarity with your body states and with what they mean. Instead, you cope through numbing. Right. And so, that was your primary numbing tool, was smoking, and so it's like you go and you take that hit. I mean, hits, I guess, what we say about weed, but anyway, you
puff.
Puff. Thank you. I don't smoke either one. So I'm like not cool enough. I'm like, how do I hold this in my hand? Anyway, you take that puff and it gives you that relief that you don't know how to get in any other way. And so when you stop that numbing pattern, and this is true for a lot of people. I mean, I've known a lot of people in recovery from a lot of different things. And the hardest part of recovery, I think, is not simply stopping the substance. It's learning how to feel and learning how to tolerate what you feel.
Yeah. Yeah. That's been a big one for me. And what I wasn't expecting is that the more I feel, right, the more secure I feel to actually feel, the harder the feelings have been. Right. Like I had where I have always been a person that has got it together. I'm like, it's fine. It's fine. Nothing's a big deal. And like, I had a total crazy thing happen to me. I think it was in January of this year, and something triggered my brain. And we were visiting my daughter in college. Something triggered my brain. It was a simple, nothing kind of thing. And we were out to dinner, and she was just tired from the day, and I'm her mom, and she just did what kids do. And she was like, snap, it's just kind of snapping at me and whatever. And instead of being like, enough, stop it, this is like, do we need to leave or what's going on? But this is not fun. Like, instead of just handling it, I had a reaction in my body, and I literally, the rest of the weekend for 2 days, I had that feeling I had from when my son turned 16, the anxiety feeling, but I couldn't get rid of it. And I couldn't get rid of it for over 48 hours, and I couldn't stop crying.
Oh, yes. So big, because your body was communicating something to you, probably not just from the present moment, but from the past, but it was something you'd never had an opportunity to feel or feel through before.
Well,
and so then you're left there with that going.
Yeah. Well, it was really weird, because it was like, I just had to feel it for those, I mean, the rest of the vacation, I was basically and it was, I knew it was free. My husband was great. He was really but it was out of character for me. So everyone was what's going on with her? But they just
what's
kind of
up with
like,
mom?
yeah, but they just kind of like gave me my space, and everybody's old enough. My daughter was, 22 at the time. And she just, they just kind of like honored that whatever was going on was going on. It was something that was very out of character, had never happened to me before any time in my life. But after I took those 48 hours or whatever to just like allow it, not push it away, allow it, um, a memory came back. And
Oh.
it was like a memory from when I was probably, and I asked my brother about it, and it was a memory of when we had been out to dinner. I was probably around 6.
Mm.
And and so it was like my dad lost his temper at a restaurant, and there was my brother remembered parts of this story. So there was something about her sort of losing her temper towards me at a restaurant. And and I think it finally felt safe enough in my body to
feel the
like, it
feelings.
was like I had to feel it to be able to like then connect the dots and release it. And it was a really like out of body experience, but I was totally in my body, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, that was a like kind of textbook post-traumatic stress disorder response. So our brain, when we go through a traumatic experience, our brain logs the sensory details around that experience as a way to try to protect us from that happening again in our lives. But it doesn't save it necessarily in a memory form. It saves it more in a sensory form. We call them body memories. So like if you go and you eat a pink berry in the woods, and that pink berry ends up giving you, a terrible sickness, and you get hives and you throw up and you have all these sensations, your brain will store the itchy feelings. It will store that sense of nausea. It will store all of that, and it will wait until you see another pink berry. And it might not be the same pink berry, but your brain's like, that's pink. It's a berry. Here we go, folks. Whoosh. And all of a sudden you're itching and you're nauseous, but you don't know why, because your brain isn't saying pink berry alert. You're not hearing it cognitively. It's just a sensory response. And so you hadn't yet had an experience where you're in a restaurant and someone's angry at you, and it's a family member angry at you, to send that flood through your body. But that's what happened. And you got flooded. And what you did so beautifully is you tolerated the feeling. Like, you didn't try to numb them out. You let it happen. And you allowed yourself to sort of listen to the whisper sensations in your bodies long enough that your brain said, let me tell you about the last or maybe the most important time you felt this. And then you're back at that berry bush and you're like, oh, this is what this is. And this is why I feel this way. And what's so cool is then your brain goes, oh, this is the difference between that pink berry and this pink berry. The difference is I was a child and I had no safety or security in that relationship. And my dad really was scary and overwhelming. And this pink berry has ridges, because this pink berry is my daughter was angry, but I'm the parent and I'm safe and I can handle it. And so now your brain knows the difference. And so then hopefully the next time you see the pink berry of your daughter angry at you at a restaurant, your brain won't flood, because it will have nuanced and noticed the ripples in this pink berry that make it very different than the poisonous pink berry.
Yeah. Yeah. I thank you for synthesizing that. It was a wild, yeah, it was a wild experience, and it was a hard experience. It really was. It was a very, it was a vulnerable experience too, because I, deep down, I was like, oh God, I'm probably freaking her out. I'm probably freaking everyone out. And I had always, been like, I gotta be the mom. I gotta be the mom. And then like, I kept having to remind myself, like, she's 22 and, and like, you take care of you right now.
Okay.
Like
it's okay.
It was the first time as a mom I remember like really saying like, you do you right now. And and that was hard. It was really hard.
Of course. Yeah. I'm so proud of you. Like
Thank
you did. Yes, you got through it. And what an incredible healing moment. And when I wrote the book, on purpose. in a way to help any parent at any stage. My kids are I have 4.5 twins, and I have a 9.5-year-old. So I'm in a very different phase of parenting than you are. But at the end of the day, what my kids need from me is very similar to what your kids need from you. Now, it's different on like a daily patterned level, but on an attachment level, it's, can you, mom, dad, parent, be secure enough in yourself, connected enough in your emotions, and available enough to me as a child, as a teen, as an adult child, that I can utilize your presence as a regulating resource in my life as I figure things out, right? And so you're doing that with your kids. I'm doing that with my kids. If you had that same panic attack, PTSD response when your kids were 4, 5, 6, 7, they might have been a little more alarmed by it than your adult kids were. But if you had done the work you just did and 48 hours later gotten that insight, it would have still been okay. Your kids would be okay. I mean, because that would just fall into that 70% of time where you weren't, if it would be more traumatic if you had maybe, stood on the table and started taking your clothes off, or, like there obviously are certain levels of trauma response that might cause some trauma for our kids, but we're also wired to heal from trauma. And so are our kids. So if we can face something and we can acknowledge it and we can grieve it, we can move through it, so can our kids. And that's what we want to be doing together.
I actually think that experience is what led me to learning about attachment, because I signed up for this class, this nervous system class. Once I had that experience, I signed up for a nervous system class, and then ultimately that led me to learning more about attachment.
Amazing.
And which you're an attachment nerd. You're like PhD level. I'm like maybe in kindergarten.
Well, I don't have a PhD, by the way. I have a master's degree. So we'll be in our...
I would say PhD level about attachment, though, because this is all my metaphor. Probably. This is my metaphor. I'm not really in I'm not really in kindergarten. But I will say my daughter, it did freak her out, right? Like it did freak her out. And we definitely have had to go through some healing work between the two of us. It did freak her out. It was like, it was
disturbing. That was a disturbing experience.
It was disturbing. And me prioritizing me, because I also then for the next 2 weeks, like I really just like had to kind of go in and like I had to be my own mother first and foremost. And in her 22 years, she really had never experienced that. And so, so there was, I would say we had a few months of really kind of working through and processing that. But the interesting thing that I think has now, like I can now look at it, is I think by me going through that and then us processing it together and having real and honest and vulnerable conversations, me sharing what I'm learning about attachment, me talking about my own attachment patterns. I think we've gotten even closer because she's started talking even more about like anxiety has become more of a conversation between us because I've experienced it too now,
Yes, I love this. When you recalibrated, right? So the thing happened and you took that, instead of going into a catastrophic place of I've ruined my kids, I've created this trauma, I'm a terrible mom, this is bad. You were like, what is this telling me? You went into a curiosity stance. What is this telling me? What does this mean? And then you invited your daughter into an authentic, age-appropriate exploration of that, right? And the two of you got to recalibrate some awareness and meaning about your relationship, which is very positive. Things have to change when our children become adults. Right? Things have to change when our children go from 6 to 8 or from 8 to 12. Things change always in the parent-child relationship. Like that's the only thing that's static, is that it's always changing. And so we're adapting based on what our nervous system and their nervous system are capable of and need. And I think you did such a good job. And I think that's just a really great example of how secure parenting is not perfect parenting. It is not pain-free, suffering-free, messy-free. It is we always come back to connection. We return to connection and we repair what it is that's gotten us off the tracks so that our kids can sense we can be there for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Well, as we wrap up, I think I heard an interview with you where I heard you describe the different forms of attachment, and you use sort of like an animal metaphor. Is that
Yes. Okay, so
do you mind doing
this
that
is fun.
here?
Let's do it. This will be I love this. I love ending on this.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so as relational creatures, if we have a person we can rely on, our pattern will be secure. And I call that the koala. So in childhood, that koala is like hanging on its mama, climbing through the branches, that proximity, that sense of chill connection, but closeness. Then if you don't have a caregiver who can do that consistently, so they do it every once in a while, but not enough, well, then you become hyper vigilant because that's the way to stay as close as possible to someone who isn't predictable in their availability to you. And so you become the honey badger. You're always looking for more honey. Are you there? Are you still there? Do you love me? Do you still love me? Do you love me now? Do you love me now? And even though that's a painful state later on in life, it's adaptive in that childhood situation. Because if you have a parent who isn't reliable, you keep your eyes on them so that you know right where they are, just in case they aren't there when you need them. The third one is when you have caregivers who are consistently unable to be there for you. So they might be highly anxious or they might be highly disconnected, but no matter what, you cannot get your needs met emotionally from them. Then you become the turtle. You learn how to stick your head inside your shell when life gets tender and emotional so that no one knows what's going on because you don't want to burden people. And you know that it actually feels worse to reach for people in pain because you'll either get dismissed or flooded with their anxiety or emotion. So you learn how to handle things inside and you build that shell up and you've got your little internal shelter and you just stay there and wait for the storm to pass and then you come back out. And the last one is if you grow up in a situation where your caregivers are frightening to you, you learn to become what I call the baby dragon. So you get scales on and you also learn to breathe fire. Because when you feel tender is when you also feel in danger. And so when you are feeling tender, you tend to either blow up or shut down, right? You scale up or send that fire out because it is too scary to be exposed during a moment of vulnerability. Those are the animals.
That's so good. And if you gave the clinical terms for each animal.
Okay, so the koala is secure. Yeah. Yep, so the koala is a secure pattern in a relationship. The honey badger we call a resistant or ambivalent pattern in a relationship. In childhood, we have all these different terms. In adulthood, we call it preoccupied. Sometimes people affiliate that with the idea of an anxious attachment, but that's from a different body of research. It's a little bit confusing. I would like to say that anything that isn't secure is anxious, so I don't label one of those anxious. The turtle, we would call avoidant attachment in childhood, and we would call it dismissive attachment in adulthood. And then the baby dragon, we would call disorganized in childhood and unresolved in adulthood.
Yeah, that's funny because when you were going through them, I was like, when I heard the turtle, I was like, that tracks. But then when I heard the dragon, I was like, a little bit of that tracks. Yep. More of the turtle tracks, but a little. And you said, I think you would be a combination of avoidant and disorganized in that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, and what we think about is we have different relationships. So like either, that avoidant, that disorganized dragon piece may have come up with a raging father, that had you just had your mother, maybe that wouldn't have been what you experienced.
Right.
Right. So, it is nuanced and it is complex, and our patterns change based on the relationships we're in. So you may notice yourself having a more avoidant pattern with one of your children and a more preoccupied pattern with another child. And that's because of what they're activating in you. And that's why it's so important to do the story work that you have done and modeled so beautifully in this episode for people.
Oh my gosh. This is such a perfect, I love the way you just gave those animal terms to me because koala, honey badger, turtle, dragon, Like
Yes.
now I have terms to use with these different attachment patterns that make sense to me. And
Oh, I'm so glad.
yeah, your book's so good. Everyone needs to read it. We're going to link to it in the show notes. And I am a super fan forever. And I just thank you for doing this powerful work. It's really amazing.
Ditto on all of that.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening. See you soon. Thanks for listening today, guys. I hope you picked up some tips, tools, maybe some baby steps for creating more balance and boundaries in your life. And I just wanted to let you know, if you want to continue moving the needle forward in creating this for yourself, having a happier household, I want you to go to my website and check out mastermindparenting.com. We have 3 beginning programs, and if you need some accountability and more support, then please look for the one that would be a good fit for you. And as always, we're on all the social channels under Mastermind Parenting. On Instagram, it's mastermind_parenting. And, you know, periodically I do pop up on different Instagram lives, Facebook lives, where I give you teaching and coaching, and I love engaging with you live to help you help your strong-willed kids so that they can feel better, because when they feel better, they do better. And I love, love, love getting to know you guys. So thanks for listening. If you like this podcast, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Super, super appreciative.